Until our last day, we're always learning. If you were like me and you didn't learn about dance earlier in your life, you can learn now. I took a dance class. I asked dancers around me. I would show them photos and I would say, what's good about this photo? What's bad about it? I'll go to workshops, watch YouTube videos of dance classes where you see the instructor teaching the class, observe any dance classes that you have the opportunity to observe. Because when you're observing a class, you hear the teacher correcting the students. There's a lot of fun ways to learn about it.
Hey, welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast. I'm your host, Raymond Hatfield, and each week I interview one of the world's most interesting photographers to learn what it really takes to capture beautiful images so that you can start to do the same. In today's Rewind episode, we are chatting with dance photographer Emily Brunner about how to create extremely technical yet artistic images at the exact same time. But first, the Beginner Photography Podcast is brought to you by CloudSpot. CloudSpot has everything you need to build a thriving photography business. You can impress your clients, deliver a professional experience, and streamline your workflow all in one platform. So grab your free forever account today over at deliverphotos.com and only upgrade when you and your business are ready. So one thing that I've turned into since my daughter has been getting more and more into sports is becoming that parent with a camera. Because of that, I've had a few other teams approach me and ask me to take photos of their teams, effectively transitioning from just parent with a camera to skilled, known sports photographer. It's weird because it's unintentional, but as you'll hear from today's guest, Emily Brunner, my story is not exclusive to just my daughter's sports, but dance too. And in many ways, I think that dance would be so much more difficult. Because in dance, it's capturing both extremely technical, but also beautifully artistic elements. So in today's episode with Emily Brunner, you're going to learn how to decide what to invest your money in when, it's not just a business yet, but it's still a hobby. How to balance composition and timing together. Because there could be an incredibly technical move that you want to capture, but how can you use your composition to show it off with beauty? And you're going to learn how you have to adopt the mindset of collaboration, as it takes working with dancers to ensure that your photos accurately reflect their skills and the art form. And remember, if you want to grow your skills as a photographer too, you cannot just listen passively. The education and insight can only take you so far. It's not until you actually get out there and start taking action on what you learn that you will actually move the needle forward. So please don't zone out and waste your time. Take notes and make a plan. That's how you get better today. With that, let's go ahead and get on into today's interview. Emily Brunner is a performance dance photographer from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, who says that she loves dance photography because of the way that it allows us to see the movement, the lines, and the power of dance in a way that we can't with our own eyes. Emily, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Raymond.
I am super excited to talk to you today for a few reasons. One of them being is that over the past few months, we have become closer within a group of photographers where we kind of talk about our goals and getting there. And I've seen you already just in the past few months grow your business. And it's something that I had no ideas about before getting into photography. I haven't interviewed somebody who does dance photography, and just out of happenstance, somebody was asking about dance photography the other day in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group. So there is a need for people like you in the world. So again, I'm really excited to talk to you about you and your journey. But before we get there, can you share with me and the listeners how you got your start in photography in the first place?
So my start in photography really came about from becoming a parent. I wanted photos of my kids to share with my family who lived far away. And I just immediately loved how capturing my life allowed me to see it in a different way and allowed me to share what was going on in my life. I remember being a kid and enjoying photography with my parents' cameras. So maybe I could say I've always been a photographer, but I got really, really into it when I had kids. So maybe about 14 years ago. And I just wanted to learn everything I could about it.
Obviously, you wanted to capture stuff to send to your family, but why weren't just the photos on, say, an iPhone good enough for you?
Oh, I wanted them to be beautiful. I would see other photos that I would love, and I thought, I want my photos to look like that. So I guess from the beginning, I could tell the difference between a snapshot and a photo taken with intention. And I knew that I wanted my photos to have that intention behind them. And I also knew that if I was taking photos, I wanted to learn about it. I wanted it to become something that I could enjoy and improve upon, so that it could be something that's fulfilling for myself rather than just a snapshot that I didn't think twice about.
Right. Of course. Of course. So when that time came to get your first camera, did you already have an idea that you wanted a specific DSLR to get into, or was it just, let's go down to Costco and buy the first camera that we see?
No, I mean, my husband bought my first DSLR for me as a Christmas gift.
Mm.
Before that, I had a little Canon PowerShot digital cameras. Before that, I had a film camera that had interchangeable lenses that my parents had bought for me. But my first real camera in the digital age, my husband picked out for me, and it was a Canon, and I still shoot with Canons today.
Yeah. So getting that camera, when you first got it out of the box, I want to know if you had to judge yourself on a scale from 0 to 10, 0 being you had no knowledge of photography whatsoever, this was your first time ever seeing a camera, and 10 being world class, where would you say that your skill level was?
I would say my skill level was maybe around a 3 or a 4.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had taken photos, I'd used my parents' film cameras when I was a kid. I never shot in manual. I remember trying once to shoot in manual when I was at Niagara Falls, because I knew that I wanted to get this, the blurred water.
Yeah.
I didn't have a clue how to do it. This was with the film camera when I was in college. And when I got the photos back, they were terrible. I mean, it was blurry, and they were like blue and purple. And so that was my only time that I ever really tried to shoot in manual. Before, there was no internet then, really. So I had no knowledge whatsoever, nowhere to research how to do it. So I would say that when I got that first DSLR out of the box, I knew just a tiny, tiny bit, but really very little. Most of what I knew was more along the lines of composition rather than technical knowledge of how to use the camera.
So how did you go about learning photography? And I'm assuming that you are shooting in manual now, is that correct?
I do, yeah. Pretty much, I usually shoot in manual unless the lighting situation around me is changing super rapidly and I can't keep up with changing my settings.
You're right, of course. So how did you go about learning manual once you got this new digital camera from your husband?
So when I got the new digital camera from my husband, I actually shot with it for several years, just with the kit lens, not really an automatic. So really focusing on the composition, capturing the moment, my perspective, anything that I could do within my own mind and control with my own hands. That's kind of what I was focusing on. But then I wanted to do more, and I researched and I realized I needed a better lens. So that was like my first step into really getting super serious into photography. I got a new lens.
What lens was that?
It was a Sigma 30 millimeter f1.4. So
okay.
Kind of
went all the way.
I did, yeah, and I loved it. It really transformed my photos in a big way.
Yeah, coming from the kit lens, I would imagine that it would just be a completely different experience.
Yeah, I loved it. It was a great purchase. And even though I rarely use it now because it's for the crop sensor camera, and now I shoot with a full frame camera, I don't want to sell the lens because it's kind of like meaningful to me. But yeah, so that was my first like real serious like dive into it. And then I knew that I wanted to learn more. When I got that first great lens and I saw the difference, I realized, gosh, if I really learned how to use my camera, I bet I could do even more. And it was at that point that I purchased an online course to dive in and just learn as much as I could about my camera.
Mm-hmm. So you didn't even go like the book route or YouTube tutorials. It was just, I'm going to jump head first into an online course.
Yeah, I did. It fits my personality. I don't tend to read much, and there's too much of a rabbit hole with YouTube videos because I don't know. I needed somebody to like guide me really specifically, keep me on track. Yeah.
Show you this is exactly what you need to do. That makes sense. Mm-hmm. I too love online courses for that exact reason. They're so hyper focused, and you don't have to go hunting around for literally. There's like 24 hours of videos uploaded to YouTube every minute or something. So trying to find the right ones is insane and it takes a long time. So Can you share what course it was that you signed up for and how did you like it?
Yeah, so I signed up for Schultz Photo School's Photo Fix class, and I really loved it. I just completely loved it. It was everything I wanted it to be. It was teaching me all the things that I kind of like knew I wanted to learn. And it did it in a really focused way. It was a great experience doing that.
So at the time, you were still focused on just photographing your children.
Yes.
hmm So I want you to tell me a little bit about the dance photography side. At what point did this come along in your life?
Well, my oldest daughter, who's 14 now, she started dancing ballet when she was 4. And so for those first few years, I was just taking kind of like snapshots of her. But she really got into it. Quickly, it became obvious that she loved it, and she started performing more and more. And I wanted beautiful photos of her performing on stage. And if I could have hired someone to do it, I would have, to be honest. But there was nobody I could hire to take the photos that I wanted of her. So I said, you know what, I'm going to learn how to do it, and I'm going to do it.
Okay, so because that's a big jump from I'm going to photograph my kids to now going into a very specialized area of photography. Did you photographed your daughter, these photos were beautiful. Did other people see them? What gave you the spark to pursue it even further?
Yeah, it was really just sharing my photos. And it was a gradual progression. It wasn't like snap overnight, my photos of her performing on stage are beautiful. I had to do a lot of trial and error and learn that way. She dances so much, I had a lot of opportunities to practice and figure out what I needed to do. But once I got some photos that I was proud of, I shared them on Facebook. The photos of my daughter, I shared them on Facebook. And then the photos that I took of other dancers in the performances, if I knew the parents, I would give them the photos. And then the school, I gave them the photos that I took as well. And really, me giving those photos to the school was what prompted dance photography to become a business for me.
How so? Did they ask for it?
They asked me, yeah, they said, oh, these are wonderful. These are great. We didn't know you were a photographer. Would you be willing to photograph our upcoming recital and sell those photos to the parents?
I love it. I love it. This just kind of fell in your lap. I mean, obviously with lots of practice and passion for it, it fell into your lap. So let's talk a little bit more about the dance photography itself, because there's really two different types of dance photography. There's the performance and then there's portraits. So if dance photography is more than just photographing people dancing, can you explain more about what else there is to this?
Well, with dance photography in particular, it's really a collaboration between the photographer and the dancer. Even if the dancer is in a performance and doesn't quite realize they're being photographed, it's still kind of a collaboration. That's their art. The photography is our art. And in the same way that we as photographers would kind of be horrified, like imagine your worst image or a photo you take that's blurry, dark, the white balance is yucky. Imagine if that photo was shared all over the internet by your friends and family, you would be embarrassed. So in that same regard, when we're taking a photograph of a dancer, they want to look their best. They want their technique to look as good as it possibly can. So as photographers, we need to be very, very careful that the photos that we're sharing of them, that we're giving to them or selling to them or sharing with our friends and family, in those pictures, the dancer's technique is good, that their toes are pointed, that their feet are nice and straight, that their legs are straight, that their shoulders aren't all tensed up, that they have a nice expression on their face. All these things that they've worked so hard for and they've trained for, we need to make sure that our photos are showing the dancers to the best of their abilities.
So that's more of the performance side. What about the portrait side? Because first of all, is doing the portrait something that still requires a stage, or does it require a studio? Where do these portraits typically happen?
Yeah, I mean, a dance portrait where it's more like just you and the dancer, and you're taking the time for them to pose, and you're working on their pose and trying to take a beautiful photo. You're creating the photo. That can happen anywhere. Mm-hmm. In my experience, we never do that on the stage. To rent out a stage or find a stage that's available to us to do that is just not really feasible.
Right.
So in my experience, doing dance portraits, we would be doing that either outside. So it's somewhat similar to just any other portrait, finding a place that has nice light and a nice backdrop. And then for a dancer in particular, it also needs to have a nice and safe ground for them to work on and stand on and dance on. Mm-hmm. So outside is an option, on streets, in parks, really just anything that you would do with a normal, regular, just portrait session. Or you can do it in a studio. And by studio, I don't literally mean you need to have a photography studio, but find a room that's big enough. You need a pretty big space to photograph a dancer. Find a room that's big enough and either bring in your own backdrop or use the walls in the room. And when you're photographing a dancer inside, you're really going to need to bring in some light. You're going to need to start using strobes to get enough light to photograph them, just because there's so much less light inside.
Right, right. I want to talk a little bit more about the posing side, though, because this is something that I feel like so many beginners already have a hard time with enough for just regular people. Right now, we have to deal with somebody who is used to doing something in an exact way. Are you manipulating that at all? Can you kind of walk me through that whole process there, how you get somebody in the pose?
Yeah, so we are manipulating it in a way. With dance photography, we're taking something that's four-dimensional. There's time, and then there's the 3 dimensions of space. So we're taking that and we're compressing it into 2 dimensions. So taking time out of it is one thing, but then taking the 3-dimensional pose and transforming it into 2 dimensions makes it a little bit tricky. Mm-hmm. So when we're posing someone, a dancer, I start with the dancer and ask them, like, what are your ideas? What sort of poses do you want to do? All dancers have different abilities. So we want to make sure that whatever we're trying to photograph for them, that it's something that they're good at, something that they feel strong and safe doing. So we never want to push them into doing something that we think is amazing, but might be beyond their comfort ability.
Right.
Yeah, so I always start with them and ask for some inspiration ideas. They always have ideas. They always know what they want to do. So we start with that, and then I have them do the movement or do the pose for me a few times. And I look at it, and I'm looking at it trying to decide what the best angle is going to be for the camera. So if they're doing an arabesque, that's where their leg goes back in the air behind them.
Okay.
Straight, their leg is straight. If we do that so their leg is pointing behind them, like away from the camera, I'm not going to see that back leg at all. It's just going to look like they're standing and they have one leg.
Yeah.
And that's not what we want. So if we're photographing an arabesque, we want to see that leg. We want that leg to look nice and long. So we want that leg parallel to the camera. Those are the kind of things that we're thinking about at the beginning of a pose. And then once we have them positioned, we might turn them ever so slightly to get their leg to look as good as it can possibly look. Then we start shooting. And we might tweak it a little bit as we go. When I'm shooting them, I want to have a nice low camera angle that makes them look tall and makes their legs look nice and long. So in that regard, it's a lot different from a portrait of a person. When we're photographing people, we often want their eyes to look nice and big. So we want to be slightly above, eye level. But with dancers, we want to get lower so that we're not distorting their body in an unflattering way. We want their legs to look nice and long.
Yeah, man, that's really interesting. I never really thought about it like that. So obviously before our interview, I was looking at your website, I was looking at your portfolio, and I was looking at your images. And there's kind of this very comfortable feeling as if all the dancers were on stage. And even for your portraits, that's kind of why I thought that the camera was so low, because we as an audience would be sitting lower, but that makes so much more sense that it just looks better on camera to accentuate those legs. Okay. Yeah. Little tricks of the trade there. Yeah. I love it. I love it. Are the poses that you are asking these dancers to get into, are they just holding I was going to say a pose, but a dance move that they are used to, or are you trying to get them to do more? Did that question make sense?
Yes, I think that makes sense. So with classical dance, with ballet, there's really a lot of sort of standard poses that we would do. With modern contemporary dance, there's going to be a lot more improvisation going on. But in a photo session with a dancer, we're typically working with some sort of pose, something that's kind of established and that is often in pieces that are going to be choreographed for the dancers. So these are things, we're not usually starting with something that's never been done before.
Right.
We're starting with something that already exists and people are familiar with. And then we might tweak it a little bit. We might rotate the body a little bit or do something different with the arms or the direction in which they're looking with their head to change it up a little bit. But there's standards with dance, just like there are with music performance, with playing an instrument or photography. There are standards that we need to stick to.
Yeah.
And when the dancers are posing, I'm not really asking them to hold a pose because dance is movement. And if they're stationary and trying to hold a pose for a photo, it's going to not look right. It's going to look kind of tense. So I think of the poses that we do as movements. And I ask my dancers, I say, you don't need to hold that for me. I need you to get into it and then go out of it the same way that you would in a performance or in a class. And then I'm timing the shot to capture at capture it at the apex of the movement that they're doing.
Wow. How many times do you think you have to have them redo a move before you nail the shot?
Sometimes we get it on the first shot. Sometimes we get it after just 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
Other times we work it for 20 minutes.
Wow.
It really just depends on what we're trying to do and the dancer and how quick my reflexes are that day.
Okay, that was a good amount about posing there. I think that I was looking at dance photography kind of all wrong, possibly because I am just so uneducated in the field completely, that to me it looks so much more difficult, right, in terms of the posing, where I said that a lot of beginners have a hard time enough posing regular people. Now we have to pose dancers. But if these dancers already have some sort of base of moves that they already get into, would you say that that is helpful to you as the photographer?
Very, very helpful. Yeah. And especially for me, I am not a dancer and I was not a dancer. So everything that I've learned about dance, I've learned over the last 14 years from watching my daughter and then taking a dance class myself, which was very humbling, but I wanted to learn more about it. With older, more experienced dancers, like knowing how to pose them is not quite as difficult as it seems, but knowing how to recognize in your photo that they're doing the pose correctly, or that maybe they're doing it correctly, but that your camera angle is flattering and that we have them turned in such a way that it's showing their lines, the literal lines of their legs and their feet and their arms, that it's making all of those look as beautiful as possible. That's the tricky part. And now younger dancers, kids who are maybe like 8, 9, 10 years old, that's going to be a lot harder, honestly, to photograph, because we're, as photographers, going to need to give them a lot more guidance.
Oh, I see. So that's where being more educated in dance, in the movement, would really help. So We're talking a lot about lines and the importance of kind of showing that power and stability, I guess. So how important of a role does focal lengths play in capturing these images? Because a wide angle lens is really going to distort lines. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, yeah. I prefer to use the longest focal length that I can, somewhere in the range of 70 to 200. I really, if at all possible, I don't want to shoot any wider than 70 millimeters. And
Wow.
this is on my full frame camera. Because you're right, wider angles are going to completely distort their shape. And for a dancer, where their body shape and movement is their art, if we distort that, it's really not flattering to them, and it's not a very honest way to show what they're doing. It doesn't really show what they're doing very well. So when I'm inside, I usually am using 70 millimeters because the spaces that I have access to inside are just not big enough to allow me to go all the way to 200 millimeters.
Right.
Now, if I'm shooting a performance, however, where we're in a big auditorium, I am often shooting at 200 millimeters.
Just because you have that extra space.
Yes, yeah.
Sure. So I'd imagine, obviously, being that far back, needing that telephoto lens, do you have any recommendations for anybody just getting into photography who wants to start dance? Maybe the 70 to 200, 2.8 is a little bit of a stretch. Do you have any recommendations for what else they could use?
So if we're talking about photography of performances, so inside a theater, you really are going to need the wide open aperture of like a 70 to 200 lens or a 24 to 70 lens to have enough light to capture the movements.
Yeah.
But with dance, there's also a lot of moments where people are not moving, where they are just taking a second in between poses to not even transition, but at the end of a pose, or at the beginning of a movement, at the beginning of a piece that they're starting, at the end of a piece. There are times where people are not moving, or they're not moving very fast. So even if you don't have a super fancy lens, you could use your kit lens, and zoom in all the way to 55 millimeters. Or if you have a kit lens that goes all the way to 300 millimeters, you could use that. You're just gonna need to compensate for the more stop down, close down aperture and increase your ISO to make up for that. If you're using a kit lens, your shutter speed is going to be a little slower. It's going to be slow enough that if a dancer jumps across the stage, then they'll be a little blurry.
A blur, sure. So would you say to prioritize a faster aperture, say over longer reach of the focal length?
That's a good question. It depends on what you're doing. If you have a dancer, if one of your kids is dancing and they're doing a lot of performances, and they're performing inside. I would say maybe prioritizing aperture might be a good thing. 50 millimeters will be okay. Like if you have like a 24 millimeter lens or even 35, you might end up with a little distortion, but you can scoot further back. If you're not right on top of them taking a picture with the wide angle lens, if you're a little further back, they're in the center of the photo, they're not going to be as distorted as if you're, right there taking the picture of them.
Yeah.
Now, if you're taking photos of your dancer outside before or after her recital or his recital, for example, then you don't really need the fast lens quite as much, because if you're outside and you have lots of light, you don't necessarily need that big wide open aperture. So in that case, for a portrait outside of your dancer to celebrate their recital, I would say prioritize the longer focal length. Use a longer focal length and get yourself down low. Don't take the picture from up above kind of looking down at them so their head's big and their legs are tiny.
Right. That's funny. Yeah, exactly. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to do that in a performance setting, but during a performance setting, are you running around from side to side during the actual performance, like while parents are in the audience to capture these photos?
No, no one should ever do that. I go to dress rehearsals. That's my secret. If a dance school asks me to do a job for them and to photograph the performance, I strongly suggest that I go to their dress rehearsal rather than the performance. Because at the dress rehearsal, I can move around. I can try some photos where I'm close to the stage. I can try some where I'm far back and capturing the whole stage in the lens. I'm not in favor of photographing during performances, both as a photographer, because that's just no fun.
Distracting.
And as a audience member, that's distracting. If you're a parent trying to take photos during the performance, you're missing the performance, taking the photos. And then for the dancers on stage, it can be distracting. It can be very distracting. If they see somebody moving around or walking around, they might think somebody's leaving their performance. One big thing about performance photography, if you are taking a photo during the performance, and even if you're taking the photos during a dress rehearsal, turn your flash off. No flash.
That's why you got to get that faster lens.
Yeah.
It's funny because once we had Charlie and we started going to these like little school performances that they put on, they're not dances or anything, but just like little kindergarten songs that they sing for all the parents. And you watch all the parents not watch their kids. They just watch their kids through their phones. You know what I mean? And while I like to, pull out the phone to take one photo just to kind of remember the moment and use it as my 1 second a day, I can imagine that in the dance setting that you would really want these photos of your child being in a situation, doing something that not only are they spending a lot of time working on, but also you don't get time to go see it very often unless it's a performance. So having a photographer run around during the performance would just be very distracting. So
it's
I'm
going
glad
to
that
turn
you get.
people angry.
I would assume so.
And if you're sitting in a seat trying to take photos from your seat, they're not going to be that great. There's going to be like heads in front of you. You're probably like not at the angle or the perspective that you want. So just go to the dress rehearsal and ask permission. Ask the school, hey, can I go to the dress rehearsal and take some photos then? If the school has an open dress rehearsal where they allow parents to come in, they would so much rather you take photos then than during the performance. And a lot of performances will say at the beginning, please put away all recording devices. Yeah, whether it's photos or videos. Dress rehearsals. It's the perfect time to take your photos.
Yeah. More weddings need signs that say, please put away your recording devices. I shared a photo in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group of a guest at a wedding that I was just at who, I couldn't believe it, just got right in front of the aisle as like the bride was coming down, and you missed the shot. It's like, what do? You always got to prepare for these things and get out of the way. But I mean, it was just so blatantly right in the middle of everything. And it was just like the brightest yellow neon dress that you've ever seen in your life. It was atrocious. But I totally went off on a tangent there, so I apologize. I want to go back to your first client. I want to know, when you decided to start charging for this, when you decided, oh, maybe I could do this, how did they find you? Were you nervous? How did the session turn out?
So my first dance portrait client, and it's kind of hard to say who the very first dance portrait client was, but with where my business is now, I'm not going to count sort of like a couple things that I did at the beginning. So my very first real true dance portrait client, they found me through Google. They had done a Google search for dance photographers. And at that time, I did have my dance photos on my website. None of them were portraits. None of them had been taken inside. They were all stage photography, performance photography up until that point.
Were these your daughter and her dance mates?
The performance photography that I had on my website at that time was from my daughter's school. So yes, it was. And then there was a couple of other things on there as well from other kinds of dance that I took some photos of. So this client found me from Google, and they called me and wanted to know if I would do some dance portraits, and they wanted photos in the studio with a nice, just plain backdrop and studio lights. I was not prepared for that. I didn't have the gear that I needed for it, and I hadn't done it before. And so I had a phone conversation with them. I always have a phone conversation with anyone who calls me for work. And I explained that we could do a photo session outside, but that I wasn't really prepared to do one inside. And I referred her to somebody else. I said, I think if that's what you want, you should call this photographer. And they went and looked at that other photographer and actually then called me back and said, no, we want you to do it.
Wow.
So I said, okay, well, let's do it. And I bought a backdrop and I bought the lights that I needed, and I did some practicing just at home. I didn't have a space to use, so I asked her if we could use her dance school's space, which they said, yeah, sure, you can come in and use our space. So that's what we did. It was, with that being my first sort of studio dance portrait session, it was really nice that we had her dance teacher there with us at the session.
I bet.
Two of her dance teachers, they were able to really guide her through the movements and the posing in a way that left me completely free to work on the lighting and the camera angles and the photography.
Yes.
So we did the photos. It was a wonderful experience. I had so much fun. My dancer was so amazing. Her mother was nice. The dance teachers were nice. Everybody was so nice. It was so much fun. And then I got home and worked on the photos that we had selected as the ones that she wanted to purchase. And I had a blast editing them. They turned out really beautiful. Some of those are still on my website now. Some of them are my favorite photos, even though it was my first time shooting with strobes for a dance session.
Oh, wow. Wow. So much going on all at once. Was there anything that you picked up by watching the dance teachers and seeing how they worked with the student?
Yes, I really picked up on just how important the best possible technique in the photo is.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing them really be very, very picky about where her foot was, how high her leg was, how much she was turned out with her leg, where her torso was facing. Just seeing them work her through those poses gave me some language to use with my future dancers and just allowed me to see what the subtle difference was in having the foot like this versus like this.
Right. Yeah, I bet that would be invaluable for sure. So the portrait side, I feel like, is pretty standard after that. You get contacted, you do the shoot, you edit the photos, and then you deliver the product. Is there anything else involved that is maybe unlike most other forms of photography?
I think one thing to keep in mind is the safety aspect, especially if the dancers are jumping. Mm-hmm. Or especially if they have had some kind of recent injury. And dancers do, just like athletes, they do sustain injuries from time to time. So we have to be really careful that we are being as safe as possible, that the surface on which they are posing and moving is not slippery. So when I'm photographing dancers on the backdrop that I use, which is seamless paper, I have a spray can of rosin that we spray. If they're in point shoes, we spray the rosin on the bottoms of their point shoes so that when they're on point, standing on the paper backdrop, they're not slipping at all.
Is rosin just like a form of glue, kind of?
Yeah, it's sticky. I think it comes from a tree sap. And violinists use it on their bows so that the hair on the bow is kind of just sticky enough to grab the strings on the violin. And dancers use it, on their feet to keep them from slipping. So what I use in the photo session is it's a spray. It's really nice and easy and not messy.
And
so it's
very cool.
We want to make sure that we don't allow the dancers to do something beyond their ability level, and that we are not asking them to do something that's dangerous for them.
Of course. Okay. That was a great tip. I never would have thought about that. I would have thought, well, as long as there's not water on the floor, we're good. So I'm glad that you shared that. Now I want to talk a little bit more about the performance photography side of it again, because I'm sure that it's not the traditional sense like it is portraits where a parent calls you, hires you to do the shoot at a school during a performance because it's the school who's hiring you for the performance. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it's the school.
Okay,
Yeah.
so kind of walk me just a little bit behind the scenes of the business side of this. Does the school pay you to photograph the dancers and then you give away all the photos to the parents, or how does that work?
There's kind of two ways to do it in kind of a hybrid way as well. Basically, whoever is keeping the photos is the one who's paying me. So sometimes a school will hire me and they will pay me, and and then I give the photos to them and they use the photos for their marketing or for whatever reason they have, or maybe they are distributing the photos to their students. I would price it according to whatever their usage is going to be. More often though, what happens is the school contacts me to take photos, and the school pays me a fee so that they can use the photos for their marketing. But then I also am selling the photos to all the parents of the dancers. And I do that through an online photo gallery.
Okay, so having all the parents come into one place to be able to sell photos online is something that I also hear a lot of questions about from new photographers. They don't know where to go. They don't know what sorts of products to offer. They don't know what is the best system to use to sell photos online. Do you have any words of advice on maybe how many products to offer and even how to, just a very basic of how to price products?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so finding a system that will allow you to sell is fairly easy. Shootproof and Pixie Set are both really great. Mm-hmm. And they have differences between them, and there's a lot of similarities between them as well. Both of those are excellent systems to use for this sort of thing. In terms of what products to offer, I'm a fan of starting simple and then improving things as you go. So if this is your first time selling anything with photos, and if you don't actually print a lot of photos yourself and you don't have a lot of experience with printing photos and most of your work is with digital, I would say just sell digital photos. Just sell, keep it simple. If it's stressing you out, get it more simple. Because if you do a great job with this first sale, then they'll call you back and have you do more in the future. And then at that point, you can add more options, you can add more products as you go. In terms of pricing, you really want to make sure that you are pricing things so that you can cover all your costs. And you have to really think about all your costs. There's a lot more than just the cost of the photo gallery or yes, the cost of prints if you're selling prints. You need to think about all your costs. Your insurance, your accounting fees, your paper and that you use to print things, just to, your office supplies. You have to think about all that. Make sure you're covering all that. Make sure that you have enough to pay yourself. However many hours you think you're going to be working on a project, double it. You're going to be working twice as many, at least, if not 3 times as many as what you think you're going to work. So you want to make sure you charge enough for that. And I know that that's hard to do with something like this because you're like, well, how many people will buy photos? How many photos will they buy? And I think when you're getting started, you just have to kind of make your best guess and maybe underestimate how many people are going to buy and how much they're going to buy and figure out your pricing that way. So in a lot of ways, you have to just dive in and start, and then you can always improve as you go.
That is such a great tip. Just try new things, go out there and for one, just to start simple. That is great. I know myself, I got very overwhelmed when I first started. I thought that I had to provide everything under the sun and I had to come up with prices for all these things. And when you go to the store, you see that they're selling things in mass quantities, so prices are lower, and you just assume that that's only what people will pay. So figuring out what it's going to be worth for you, somebody who's not selling in mass quanities, is a great tip. Great tip.
Yeah, and I think most people who are buying things from you understand that you are not Walmart. I really do, at least in my experience. People understand there's a difference.
Yeah, that's a hard thing, but I'm glad that you shared that. Again, that's another huge hurdle for beginners to get over. Whenever I hear any sort of question about pricing, I know that's going to help a lot of people. Can you kind of share, now that you've been shooting dance for a while, I'm sure that you've seen a lot of dance photos. I know personally that you've taken dance photography workshops. What are some signs of an amateur dance photographer?
Okay, so some signs of an amateur dance photographer are having a camera perspective where the camera is high and looking like maybe the camera is at face level or maybe like chest level or maybe even higher, especially for the little kids.
Right.
You're even like above them. Using a wide angle lens, especially if you're close up taking a photo of somebody. And then probably the really big thing is if the dancer's not doing the pose correctly. If their foot is like sickled, which means it's sort of like turned in like this. If they're doing a jump and their toes are not pointed, but their toes are kind of like straight up or just kind of like halfway pointed. If a knee is bent when it shouldn't be bent. So if the dancer's technique is not correct in the photo, even if it's a beautiful photo with the most beautiful light, and the most gorgeous background ever, it's not a good photo. I would say those three things are what would tell me that it's an amateur or somebody who hasn't yet studied and learned how to take really great dance photos.
Yeah. What I'm learning is that this form of photography is very, very, very detail oriented and requires a very trained eye from the photographer. And I think it's great to hear that you didn't even start off dancing as a child, that you got into this much later after just watching your own daughter, which just kind of goes to show that even if you didn't grow up in dance, you can still pursue something like this and be successful. So
yes,
that's great.
we can always learn. I mean, until our last day, we're always learning. If you were like me and you didn't learn about dance earlier in your life, you can learn now. I took a dance class. I asked dancers around me. I would show them photos and I would say, what's good about this photo? What's bad about it? I'll go to workshops, watch YouTube videos of dance classes where you see the instructor teaching the class, observe any dance classes that you have the opportunity to observe. Because when you're observing a class, you hear the teacher correcting the students. So you immediately learn what's proper and what is not. There's a lot of fun ways to learn about it.
I never would have thought about that. That is so smart. I would have just Googled dance photography tips on YouTube. But the fact of just let's just see what a class entails that's so smart. I'm not a very smart person. This is why I like having these conversations with others, because now I get these other perspectives. That's awesome. Yeah. What do you think would be something that somebody would be surprised to find out about being a dance photographer?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, something people would be surprised to find out about being a dance photographer. Maybe that you need to have wardrobe supplies on hand. You need scissors to trim away like loose strings. You need safety pins because the costuming, like what they're wearing, the wardrobe is also an important part of the photos. So you kind of need to have just some backup supplies. There's also a lot of retouching that often needs to happen because with a lot of dance photos, there's a lot of skin showing, arms, legs, faces. When people have bruises on their legs, maybe they have a line around their ankle from where they were wearing socks earlier in the day, and then they take the sock off before the photo session and it takes several hours for that, I don't know what you call it, that line around the ankle to go away.
Yeah.
So if it's still there, you have to edit that out later. So editing dance photos, because of all the skin retouching and the wardrobe, is pretty intense.
That just all goes back to having that strong attention to detail.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Well, Emily, I want to thank you for your time. You've been very gracious and you have answered every question that I have thrown your way and then some. I asked way more questions than I even had written down and you answered them all wonderfully. I know that the listener is going to get a lot out of this interview with you. So thank you. Before I let you go, can you share with the listeners where they can find some of your work online?
Yeah, so my website is www.emilybrunnerphotography.com. And Brunner is with 2 N's, Brunner. That's my website. And then I also have an Instagram, and it's Emily Brunner Photography, and a Facebook page for my business, Emily Brunner Photography. So they all have the same name. So you can find me in any of those places.
That's find me branding right there.
At the local theater taking photos of dancers.
Yeah. Well, again, Emily, I want to thank you so much for coming on. And I always love keeping up with you and your stories. And even on Instagram, I love your little weekly stories that you share on there as well. So I look forward to keeping up with you and everything that you're doing.
Thanks so much, Raymond.
Seriously incredible chat with Emily Brunner. So, Emily, thanks again so much for coming on. Today's action item, meaning the one thing that if you implement it will move the needle forward in your photography journey, is this. Practice capturing motion. Motion can be incredibly difficult to capture, especially when you're just starting out. There's a lot of elements that you need to have control over, from your shutter speed to your autofocus mode. It's not as simple as set it and forget it. So if either of those are out of whack, then the motion gets missed. So photograph a friend or family member dancing, or your dog running and playing fetch. Whatever it is, something with motion. A car driving by, whatever. Master just the shutter speed and autofocus modes at first. And once you're able to capture the motion, then work on your composition and capturing not just a photo of motion, but an intentional image of motion. So there you go. And hey, I would love to see you in the free and amazing Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook community. So come join us, won't you? Just head over to beginnerphotopod.com/group now. Again, that's beginnerphotopod.com/group. And I'll see you inside. Until next week, remember, the more that you shoot today, the better of a photographer you will be tomorrow. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. Start a conversation. Grow together. That is it for this week. Remember, the more that you shoot today, the better of a photographer you will be tomorrow. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.